Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. They say arrogance is expensive, but I never imagined it could cost someone $10 million in 3 days. When the new CEO called me replaceable baggage and fired me on the spot, she had no idea she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her corporate career. See, my name wasn't just on my employee badge. It was on the contracts that kept her entire company running. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in this position. About 8 years ago, I was working as a senior systems architect for a scrappy little fintech startup. We were barely keeping the lights on, burning through investor money, and the founder, let's call him Mike, was my college roommate and one of my closest friends. The company had this revolutionary payment processing system, but we were hemorrhaging cash trying to get it off the ground. That's when Mike came to me with a problem. The company needed a commercial lease for our headquarters, but their credit was shot. The banks wouldn't touch them. They also needed licensing for some proprietary banking APIs that were essential to our core product, but again, no financial institution would work with a startup that might fold next month. Now, I had been working in tech for about 15 years at that point, and I had built up a decent credit history and some savings. More importantly, I had started a small consulting LLC a few years earlier for some side work, so I made Mike an offer that seemed reasonable at the time. I would use my LLC to secure the commercial lease and the API licensing agreements, then lease them back to the company at cost, plus a small administrative fee. Mike was incredibly grateful. The legal team drew up what they called a master service agreement that covered the lease arrangements and the software licensing. The contract had some pretty standard business language, including a clause that said if my employment was terminated for any reason, we'd need to renegotiate the terms of these external services. At the time, neither of us thought much about it. We were friends, the company was small, and I figured I'd be there until retirement. The years went by, and the company grew. What started as 12 people in a cramped office became 300 employees across 4 floors. Our payment processing system became one of the most reliable in the industry. We handled transactions for major e-commerce platforms, processed payroll for mid-sized companies, and managed escrow services for real estate firms. I stayed in my senior architect role because I genuinely loved the technical challenges, and honestly, the consulting fees for my LLC were providing a nice supplemental income. Mike always made sure the company paid my LLC invoices promptly. Every month, they'd send payment for the lease and licensing fees, about $45,000 combined. It wasn't huge money for a company our size, but it was significant enough that I never had to worry about my mortgage. The arrangement was so routine that most people in the company didn't even know about it. It was just another line item in the facilities and technology budgets. Last year, Mike decided it was time to retire. He'd been talking about it for months, wanting to travel with his wife, maybe buy a boat, spend time with his grandkids. The board of directors hired some big-name consulting firm to find a replacement CEO who could take the company to the next level. They wanted someone with experience at larger corporations, someone who could optimize operations and drive efficiency gains. Enter the new CEO. I'm going to call her Karen because honestly, that name fits her personality perfectly. She came from one of those massive consulting firms where they teach you to speak in buzzwords and treat employees like line items on a spreadsheet. She had this whole presentation about right-sizing the organization and eliminating redundancies and streamlining legacy processes. During her first week, Karen scheduled one-on-one meetings with all the department heads and senior staff. When it was my turn, I walked into her office expecting the usual meet-and-greet conversation. Instead, she had a printout of my personnel file and a very serious expression on her face. She started by asking me about my role and responsibilities. I explained that I was the senior systems architect, responsible for maintaining the core payment processing infrastructure, managing our database systems, and overseeing technical integration with our major clients. I'd been with the company for 8 years and had designed most of the systems that were currently generating revenue. Karen listened with this skeptical expression, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. Then she said something that should have been a warning sign. She told me that she'd been reviewing our technology expenses and had noticed that we were paying significant fees for some external consulting services that seemed redundant with internal capabilities. I started to explain about the licensing agreements and the lease arrangement, but she cut me off. She said she'd already scheduled a meeting with legal to review all of our vendor contracts, and she was confident that we could renegotiate or eliminate most of these legacy arrangements that were bleeding money. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Karen basically dismissing me while muttering something about startup-era inefficiencies. I walked back to my desk with a bad feeling in my stomach, but I figured once she understood the technical details, she'd realize how important these arrangements were. 2 weeks later, Karen called an all-hands meeting. She stood up in front of the entire company with a PowerPoint presentation about transformation initiatives. She talked about how the company had grown complacent during the startup phase and how it was time to adopt enterprise-level operational standards. Then she started talking about staffing optimization. She said the company had been carrying too many people in redundant roles and that modern technology allowed them to accomplish the same work with fewer resources. She mentioned that they'd be implementing some organizational changes over the next few weeks and that employees should focus on demonstrating their value add to the company's core mission. During the Quanda session, someone asked about job security. Karen gave this corporate non-answer about how high-performing employees had nothing to worry about, but that the company needed to make some difficult decisions to ensure long-term sustainability. She used phrases like right-sizing and strategic workforce optimization that made everyone nervous. The really ominous part came when she started talking about outdated processes and legacy systems. She said too many decisions at the company were still being made based on startup-era thinking rather than data-driven analysis. She specifically mentioned that some senior employees seemed resistant to change and were holding back progress. After the meeting, several of my colleagues came up to me looking worried. A few people mentioned that during their one-on-one meetings with Karen, she'd asked pointed questions about my role and whether my responsibilities could be handled by other team members. Someone from HR quietly told me that Karen had been asking about the feasibility of outsourcing some of our technical work to offshore contractors. The writing was on the wall, but I still hoped that common sense would prevail. I'd been with the company for 8 years. I knew our systems better than anyone, and replacing me would be incredibly disruptive. Plus, the licensing agreements and lease arrangement meant that firing me would create significant complications that would cost far more than my salary. I was wrong about the common sense part. 3 days later, I got a calendar invite for an urgent meeting with Karen and someone from HR. The meeting was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, which is never a good sign. I spent the morning updating documentation and making sure all my current projects were in good shape, just in case. When I walked into the conference room, Karen was sitting at the head of the table with a manila folder in front of her. The HR representative, a nice woman who'd always been friendly, couldn't make eye contact with me. Karen didn't waste time on pleasantries. She said that after careful analysis, they determined that my role was no longer aligned with the company's strategic direction. She used a bunch of corporate buzzwords about operational efficiency and resource optimization, but the bottom line was clear. I was being terminated, effective immediately. I started to ask about the transition plan for my projects, but Karen cut me off. She said they'd already identified an offshore development team that could handle my responsibilities at a fraction of the cost. She seemed particularly pleased with herself when she mentioned that the offshore team had more recent certifications than I did. Then came the part that really got under my skin. Karen looked me straight in the eye and said that, frankly, I'd become a relic of the startup phase. She said the company had outgrown the need for employees who were stuck in old ways of thinking. She called me completely replaceable and said that my departure would probably improve team efficiency. That's when I realized that Karen had no idea about the licensing agreements or the lease arrangement. Someone had definitely dropped the ball during her transition briefings. I decided to give her one chance to reconsider before things got complicated. I said that before she finalized this decision, she might want to review the master service agreement that covered some critical infrastructure services. I mentioned that terminating my employment would trigger certain contractual obligations that could be expensive for the company. Karen actually laughed. She said she'd already reviewed all the vendor contracts, and that my consulting fees were exactly the kind of wasteful spending she was hired to eliminate. She said the company owned everything I'd ever worked on, and that my agreements were just overpriced baggage from the startup era. I tried once more to explain the situation, but she wasn't interested in listening. She said I was terminated effective immediately, and that security would escort me out of the building. She told me not to bother trying to negotiate because the decision was final and non-reversible. That's when I realized this conversation was being recorded, probably for legal protection, so I decided to be very clear about what was happening. I asked her directly if she was sure she wanted to terminate all active agreements associated with my personnel file immediately. Karen got this smug expression and said yes, she was absolutely sure. She said all of my agreements were terminated along with my employment, and the company would handle everything internally going forward. She said I was gone, and the company owned everything I'd ever touched. I handed over my badge and company laptop, then said that I understood her position completely. I told her I'd notify my legal counsel to cease the external service provisions effective at midnight, as per the termination clause in the master service agreement. I mentioned that the transition might cause some temporary disruptions, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Karen actually laughed again and called it a sad bluff. She said she wasn't intimidated by empty threats, and that I should focus on updating my resume instead of trying to create problems for the company. Security escorted me to my desk to collect my personal belongings, then walked me to the parking garage. As I drove home, I called my lawyer and explained the situation. He reviewed the master service agreement and confirmed what I already knew. The termination of my employment automatically triggered the contract renegotiation clause, and until new terms were agreed upon, I had no obligation to continue providing the services. Here's where it gets interesting. The licensing agreement for our core banking APIs wasn't just some minor software subscription. It was the foundation that allowed our entire payment processing system to function. Without access to these APIs, the company couldn't process transactions, couldn't connect to bank networks, and couldn't provide any of the services that generated revenue. Similarly, the commercial lease wasn't just for office space. It covered the server room where all of our primary infrastructure was hosted, including the database clusters that stored transaction records for hundreds of thousands of clients. The lease agreement specifically stated that access would be terminated if the contracting party's employment status changed without prior arrangement for service continuation. My lawyer sent a formal notification to the company at midnight, explaining that the external services would be suspended pending renegotiation of the contract terms. The notification included copies of the original agreements and outlined the steps necessary to restore services. I went to bed that Friday night wondering how long it would take Karen to figure out what had happened. I got my answer at 6:47 a.m. on Monday morning when my phone started ringing. It was Karen, and she was absolutely furious. She started screaming about sabotage and lawsuits before I could even say hello. Apparently, the offshore development team had tried to log into our systems over the weekend and discovered that they couldn't access anything. I let her finish her rant, then calmly explained that I hadn't sabotaged anything. I told her that she had terminated my employment, which automatically ended the service agreements as clearly stated in the contracts. I said I was simply following her lead by eliminating the overpriced baggage she'd complained about. Karen demanded that I restore access immediately. She said she was ordering me to fix whatever I'd broken, and that if I didn't comply within the hour, she'd have me arrested for sabotage and sued for damages. I explained that I was no longer an employee of the company, so she couldn't order me to do anything. I also pointed out that the services had been legally terminated according to the contract terms she'd agreed to enforce. If she wanted to restore services, she'd need to negotiate a new agreement with my legal counsel. That's when Karen made her second big mistake. She said that the company owned all the infrastructure and software and that I had no right to cut off access. She threatened to get a court injunction if I didn't restore services immediately. I had to explain to her that the company didn't own the API licensing or the server infrastructure. My LLC owned those assets and had been leasing them to the company under the master service agreement. The company owned the software they'd developed, but they couldn't run that software without the underlying infrastructure that I controlled. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Karen asked how much it would cost to restore the services temporarily while they found alternative solutions. I told her that my lawyer had calculated the reactivation fee based on the emergency service provisions in the original contract. The cost would be $800,000, plus a new monthly rate of $120,000 until a permanent solution was implemented. Karen hung up on me. About an hour later, I got a call from Mike. He'd been enjoying his retirement until one of the board members called him in a panic. Apparently, the company's payment processing system had been down since Monday morning, and major clients were threatening to switch to competitors. The board was demanding answers, and Karen had been deflecting blame onto the IT department. Mike asked me to walk him through what had happened. When I finished explaining, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that he'd tried to brief Karen about the special arrangements during the transition, but she'd dismissed most of his input as startup legacy issues that she'd handle herself. He also mentioned that the board was meeting that afternoon to discuss the situation. Several major clients had already contacted them directly about the service outage, and the company was facing potential penalties for breach of contract if the system wasn't restored quickly. Mike asked if there was any way to work out a temporary solution while cooler heads prevailed. I told him that I'd be happy to discuss options with the board directly, but that I wouldn't deal with Karen anymore. I also mentioned that the longer the services remained offline, the more expensive it would be to restore them, since the emergency provisions included penalty clauses for extended outages. By Tuesday morning, the situation had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The company's payment processing system handled transactions for several major e-commerce platforms, and the extended outage was costing those clients millions of dollars in lost sales. Word had gotten out in the industry that the company was having serious technical problems and competitors were aggressively pursuing their clients. I received a call from the chairman of the board asking if I could meet with them that afternoon to discuss a resolution. I agreed, but only on the condition that Karen wouldn't be present. The chairman assured me that they wanted to handle this situation professionally and find a solution that worked for everyone. The board meeting was held at their law firm's offices rather than the company headquarters. 5 board members were present, along with the company's general counsel and an outside attorney who specialized in corporate crisis management. They'd obviously spent considerable time reviewing the master service agreement and understanding the technical implications of the situation. The chairman started by acknowledging that there had been a serious miscommunication during the CEO transition process. He said the board had been unaware of the critical nature of my consulting arrangements and that Karen had been operating under incomplete information when she made the termination decision. The general counsel presented an analysis of the company's potential liability. If the service outage continued much longer, they could face tens of millions of dollars in damages from client lawsuits and regulatory penalties. Several major clients had already initiated breach of contract proceedings, and the company's professional liability insurance wouldn't cover damages related to management decisions. They asked what it would take to restore services immediately. My lawyer had prepared a proposal that outlined 3 options. First, they could pay the emergency reactivation fee and continue under the old contract terms pending a longer-term solution. Second, they could negotiate a new service agreement with enhanced terms that reflected the true value of the infrastructure. Third, they could buy out my interest in the licensing and infrastructure assets for a lump sum payment. The numbers were significant. The emergency reactivation would cost $1.2 million plus monthly fees of $150,000. A new long-term service agreement would cost about $300,000 per year, but would include guaranteed service levels and disaster recovery provisions. The buyout option would require a payment of $4 million plus my reinstatement as a senior consultant at triple my previous salary. While the board was discussing their options, one of the members asked what had happened to Karen. The chairman explained that they'd placed her on administrative leave pending a full investigation of her decision-making process. They'd discovered that she'd ignored multiple warnings from the legal and technical teams about the potential consequences of terminating my employment. The investigation had also revealed that Karen had been planning to outsource several other critical functions without properly understanding the contractual and technical implications. Her aggressive cost-cutting approach had nearly triggered a complete collapse of the company's operations. By Wednesday afternoon, the board had made their decision. They voted to terminate Karen's employment for cause, citing gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Because she was fired for cause rather than laid off, she forfeited her severance package, which would have been worth about $2 million. They also voted to accept my buyout proposal with some modifications. Instead of reinstating me as an employee, they offered me a master consulting agreement that would pay me $200,000 per year for 15 hours of work per week, with the flexibility to work remotely from anywhere. The infrastructure buyout would be paid over 3 years to help with their cash flow, but I'd retain ownership of the assets as collateral until the payments were complete. I accepted their proposal and services were restored that evening. The technical transition went smoothly because I'd built comprehensive documentation over the years, and the remaining IT team was competent enough to handle the day-to-day operations once access was restored. The aftermath was both satisfying and educational. The company's stock price had dropped 12% during the 3-day outage, costing shareholders about $40 million in market value. Several major clients did switch to competitors, resulting in about $6 million in lost annual revenue. The board's investigation revealed that Karen's cost-cutting initiatives would have saved the company maybe $300,000 per year, while her poor decisions cost them nearly $50 million in 3 days. Mike called me a few weeks later to see how things were going. He'd heard through the grapevine that Karen was having trouble finding new employment. Apparently, word had spread in the corporate consulting world about what had happened, and her reputation for due diligence had been permanently damaged. The really ironic part came about 6 months later. I was checking my LinkedIn messages and found a connection request from Karen. She'd sent a note asking if I'd be willing to provide a professional reference for a CEO position she was pursuing. She mentioned that she'd learned valuable lessons about the importance of understanding technical infrastructure, and that she thought our collaboration had been a learning experience for both of us. I didn't respond to her message, but I did screenshot it for my personal entertainment. Instead, I was busy depositing the first quarterly payment from the infrastructure buyout. A check for about $330,000 that represented more money than I'd made in any previous year as a regular employee. These days, I work about 15 hours per week from my home office, providing technical oversight and strategic consulting for the company that tried to eliminate me. I've got complete flexibility to set my own schedule, work from anywhere with an internet connection, and pursue other consulting opportunities during my abundant free time. The consulting agreement runs for 5 years with automatic renewal options and includes cost of living adjustments and performance bonuses. I'm making about 3 times what I earned as a regular employee, working a fraction of the hours, and I own several $1 million worth of infrastructure assets that generate passive income. The new CEO they hired to replace Karen is actually competent. She took the time to understand the technical and contractual landscape before making any major changes, and she's been very respectful of the arrangements that keep the company operational. We have a good working relationship, and she frequently asks for my input on technical strategy decisions. The company has recovered from the disruption and is actually doing better than ever. They've learned to value institutional knowledge and technical expertise rather than trying to replace everything with cheaper alternatives. The board has implemented new policies requiring thorough impact analysis before terminating any senior employees, especially those involved in critical infrastructure. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that Karen's arrogance actually did me a huge favor. If she had approached the situation professionally and worked with me to transition the infrastructure arrangements, I'd still be working 60-hour weeks as a regular employee for a fraction of my current compensation. Instead, her determination to prove that I was completely replaceable forced her to learn that some people really aren't replaceable. They just become a lot more expensive when you try to replace them. She was absolutely right that she could replace me. She just didn't realize that the replacement version would cost 10 times more and work on my terms instead of hers. The moral of the story is pretty simple. Before you decide someone is dispensable, make sure you understand exactly what they bring to the table. And if someone tries to warn you about unintended consequences, maybe listen to them instead of assuming you know better. Arrogance is expensive, but ignorance combined with arrogance can cost you everything. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened almost 15 years ago when I was still living in my home country. I worked in a warehouse that served as a distribution center for a supermarket chain. A very famous one, by the way. I was an inspector in the shipping department. Basically, the sorting section would bring to the docks the goods that the store had requested, and we would prepare and load the shipment onto the truck. In the shipping department, there were assistants who did the manual work, assembling the loads on pallets, wrapping them with stretch film, and loading them onto the truck, while the inspector checked whether everything being sent to the store was correctly labeled and secure for transport. Additionally, the inspector entered all data in the internal system, sealed the truck, and printed the load summary for the administrative department to generate an invoice. Of course, inspectors also helped the assistants with the heavy lifting. Most of the time, this didn't interfere with our main responsibilities and actually sped up the process, especially since our shift, the afternoon shift, had an issue with trucks arriving late. Many times, we wouldn't finish everything on time, leading to overtime and sometimes having to leave the remaining work for the night shift, which wasn't ideal since each shift had its own list of stores to attend to, and this delay affected them. Each inspector worked with at least one assistant, but sometimes more, depending on their workload. Some inspectors had more stores to handle that day, some stores required extra loads, or other situations that called for additional help. We had a supervisor who had been with the company for many years and had worked in the department before being promoted. The job was great and everything ran smoothly, until a crisis hit another department, leaving it without a supervisor. Management decided they needed someone experienced to lead that department, so they transferred our supervisor there. In his place, they promoted someone from another department who had no leadership experience. Our department was running well, with no need for drastic changes, but our new supervisor didn't see it that way. One day, I arrived at work, and as usual at the beginning of the shift, the supervisor printed out a sheet listing the stores to be handled that day, along with which inspector was assigned to each one. So far, so good. He made some changes, but nothing too concerning. However, before we started working, he called the entire department for a quick meeting. In this meeting, he announced that he had reassigned which assistants would work with which inspectors, and showed us a printed list. To my surprise, there was no name next to mine. In other words, I was expected to work without an assistant. I protested immediately. I don't remember the exact details of the discussion as it happened a long time ago, but basically, his idea was that as other assistants finished helping their assigned inspectors, whoever was available would come help me, something that already happened naturally, as we had a strong sense of camaraderie in our department. Plus, no one wanted to be seen by the bosses standing around doing nothing, but it wasn't enough. It would overburden me. I tried to argue my case, but I couldn't convince him. Other inspectors were also left without assistance, but they were relatively new to the company and didn't say anything, probably out of fear of losing their jobs or something similar. Well, since I couldn't change his mind, I accepted that I would be working without an assistant. I took the signs for the stores I was responsible for, found available docks for them, placed the signs on the dock gates, noted on the printed sheet which stores were at which docks, then went to the dock of the first store I would handle. I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, and waited. Goods started arriving, but I didn't touch a single box. The dock filled up, and I didn't move an inch. After a few hours, the supervisor walked through the department to check on things, saw the state of my dock, and asked why the load wasn't being prepared. I simply said, "I don't have any assistants. How am I supposed to prepare the load?" and remained standing with my arms crossed. Eventually, some assistants came to help me, and when they did, I helped them with the heavy lifting. But soon, the inspectors they were originally assigned to needed more help, and of course, they left my load behind. By the end of the shift, one load was ready to be loaded onto the truck, but another was only halfway done. I placed the paperwork with the load details in a visible spot for whoever would finish it and left. As I was leaving, my supervisor asked about the loads. Without turning around, I told him where the papers were. He asked if I wasn't going to finish them, and I didn't even respond. The next day, he called me in for a meeting. When I arrived, the manager was also there. They asked me what had happened the previous day. I replied, "Nothing that I remember." They brought up the incomplete loads. I explained that my shift had ended and I couldn't stay for overtime, so I left the information for whoever would finish the job, and I even told the supervisor where the papers were. Then I took out my wallet, pulled out my time card receipt, and showed them that I had clocked out at the designated time. They mentioned that I had spent most of the shift standing with my arms crossed. I responded that I had done my job, which, as stated in my contract, consisted solely of verifying the load, supervising assembly and loading, entering data into the system, sealing the truck, and printing the load summary. Nothing beyond that. I continued by saying that anything else I might do during my shift was purely out of goodwill to help the assistants and speed up the work. But on the previous day, I had chosen to exercise my right not to perform those extra tasks because I felt unfairly treated by my supervisor, who had not assigned me a dedicated assistant. That would have significantly overburdened me with tasks I wasn't paid to do. The manager simply looked at the supervisor and said, "He needs to have an assistant." Then he turned to me and asked me to leave. The two of them stayed there for quite a while. That same day, I was assigned an assistant, and we never spoke of it again. Nothing like that ever happened again. The new supervisor's stint lasted only a few months before he returned to his previous role. He had put too much trust in employees he was friends with, but who weren't very competent at their jobs, and that was his downfall. Our old supervisor came back to his position, and everything improved again. The next one is an entitled people story. Today I went to IKEA to buy some furniture to remodel our master closet. I had gotten close to 15 or 20 slab boxes, which all needed to be assembled together. I also had a cart full of other random things like pans, napkins, cups, and other impulse buys. After I had finished getting all my things from their warehouse, I made my way towards checkout. When it was my turn, I first scanned all my loose things with the handheld scanner and then made my way to my flatbed cart full off the thin, heavy boxes. My back was already a bit sore from lifting each one of those into the flatbed, so I decided to use the manual entry feature on the screen instead. Sure, it's a bit slower, but since each barcode was on the flat side of each box and not the edge side, I'd rather not mess up my back more. You know how IKEA gives you the coordinates to the boxes in their warehouse a half-mile away? Apparently those also function as a key and barcode for each item. When I had designed my closet layout upstairs in the showroom, I asked for it to be printed out so I could refer off of it while shopping in the warehouse. I started going down that sheet, entering each one into the screen. It shouldn't have taken too long, 5 minutes max. Shouldn't is the key word. As I'm almost done, I hear behind me a voice saying, "You can't enter each item in." I turn around to see a young girl wearing the IKEA vest, and I start explaining to her how, 1, there's nowhere to place each of the boxes as I go down scanning them, and 2, my back is already sore from lifting them into the cart, so I'm going down my list instead. Now I thought this would be a civilized conversation. Worst case, fine. Give me another cart to place each box into. Nope. She condescendingly replies back, "Did you ask for help before thinking you could do it your own way?" This really caught me off guard, and I said back, "Didn't think I needed to. I don't need help." She then tells me to move aside and that she'll do it for me. I really didn't think she wanted to lift each one of those boxes by herself, but whatever, her store, not mine. As I start moving to the side, she begins lecturing me on how, by going off the list and not scanning, I risk inputting the wrong number or quantity. She was right. However, I was double-checking everything. Besides, with purchases over $1K, the screen anyway makes an employee verify your rung-up items before paying. I could see what she was saying as much as I didn't like her attitude. I was just nodding and giving yay responses while she's scanning my whole loose cart first. Oh yeah, she canceled my whole transaction on the screen I had rung up so she could do it herself. Anyway, once she's done with the loose items, she looks over at me and says, "You gonna push the cart to me, or do I also have to do that?" At this point, I'm getting really frustrated for the uncalled for attitude. So I respond back with, "I mean, you did tell me to ask for help," and I took a step back. She gives me the coldest look and begins scanning the first box at the very top, after which she realizes what she got herself into. Scanning 15 more heavy flat boxes stacked with no barcodes on the sides. Plus, she can't even use my paper list according to her. She gets maybe 4 or 5 boxes down somehow, and while I'm now just standing off to the side, she looks over and asks, "So do you now also want me to pay for your things?" Me being pissed off by her tone, I say, "Sure, go for it." Now here's the kicker. She lets go of the handheld scanner and it flies back to the screen, hitting it hard. At first I thought it slipped out of her hand, so I subconsciously bent down to grab it hanging, but I noticed her walking away. I call after her, but she just walked towards her supervisor and he came over. I assume she just got upset and flung the scanner and walked away. At this point, I'm pissed. I've been in checkout for close to 15 minutes. I don't even know if she's scanned anything right. And if I'm paying close to $1,500 on furniture, I'm damn well gonna double check. I explain everything to her supervisor, who apologized on her behalf. I frankly didn't even understand her attitude and why. By this point, the scanner is still hanging by the ground and there's a tiny scratch on the screen too. I just tell the supervisor everything and that if he wants proof to ask the folks behind me in line or check the screen security camera. The family behind me backed me up and said that if they was the ones up there and their son was standing by the screen, that scanner could have hit him. In the end, the supervisor canceled the transaction again and scanned it all himself, and once I verified it was all scanned right, I paid and was on my way. He even put in a 5% discount for me as an apology, which was really nice of him. That was a little over $70 off. I'm just left confused where her entitled and condescending attitude came from. I get we all have bad days, but you don't have to take it out on your customers. As I'm leaving with my 2 carts, I glance over to the adjacent checkout line where she was, and she just looks over and gives a cocky smile. I just shake my head and keep walking. The next one is an entitled people story.
Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, Public Payback to a Customer Who Refused to Pay. So I had a garden maintenance business, and had a lady living in a very nice area call me and ask me to do some regular visits. I was actually in the process of selling the business, but made 6 visits. She was pretty bad at paying, but had paid a previous invoice, so I let her balance grow to about $300 before sending numerous reminders. When she found out I was selling the business, she obviously decided to try and not pay me. I was texting and emailing her every few days, and she would ignore 90% of my messages, and eventually ask me to stop harassing her, stating she had COVID and would settle it the following week. I'd basically written this off in my head, not caring about the money, but was angry because she's a high-profile lawyer, lives in a rich suburb, and had the means to pay me. I also mentioned the situation to my mom, who said that I shouldn't threaten a lawyer and should just walk away. Once the business had sold, I found her lawyer profile and where she worked. This is a big company in the city, and I noticed they had Google reviews open but had 0 reviews. I left a 1-star review very openly stating this was not the company, but her and what had happened. By this point, I've moved to South America for 6 months of backpacking, and I didn't really care what would happen. I got a call from Jordan, the new owner of the business, the next day saying he'd received a call and was having legal action threatened against him, and asking me to remove it. I told him the situation, and I asked for 24 hours more to resolve it, and if it got too heated, I would take it down. He previously worked for me, and I consider him a friend, so thankfully he was all good with that. I quickly spoke to my brother who has a law degree, just to make sure she was just bluffing. At the end of the day, it's not illegal to make a Google review. I then received an email from her demanding I remove it, and she would pay me. I very strongly worded a response saying it will not be removed until money is clear in my account. I fell asleep then, and when I woke up, I had 3 more emails, initially threatening me, then eventually saying that she had paid the money. Once I checked the money was in my account, I removed the post. She had made it very clear that she was under extreme pressure from her firm. I'd also sent the email to their reception, and I'm sure the whole office was aware of this incident and her reputation had been affected. Moral of the story, if you have a public profile, don't treat people badly in the days of the internet. I also feel especially content that I faced up with a lawyer who probably thought she could scare me and not pay, and give them a taste of their own medicine. The next story is titled, Stole My Seed, eh? Now we're going to get real cozy. I, 43M, flew Southwest recently and spaced on checking in early, so I ended up way in the back of the plane. It was only an hour flight, so I wasn't too distraught about it. I had a single large backpack as carry-on, so after making my way to the last few rows on a packed flight with a line boarding behind me, I spied an aisle seat and told the fellow at the window I'd be joining him, leaving the middle seat open for the moment. Again, it was to be a full flight, so every seat would be taken. I went to stow my bag in the overhead and discovered it was full, so I turned slightly to the left to reach up to the compartment in the next row behind me. Having stowed my bag, I turned back to take my seat, only to discover the guy who had been in line behind me, who absolutely saw me and heard me tell the guy already seated I would be sitting there, had decided to just help himself to my seat. I immediately chimed in with, "Hey, I was about to sit there," to which he replied with a shrug and a really condescending smirk, then offered, "Oh well, there's still a few seats behind you." I looked behind me and contemplated if this was a hill worth dying on. Turns out it was. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Nope, we're best friends now," and squeezed myself into the middle seat. I am 6'1", 230 pounds. He was at least that, as was the window seat guy. This just became a very cramped situation. As if the universe was already on my side, I discovered immediately that he was sitting on half my seatbelt. I very forcefully pulled it from under him, and followed it with the same shrug and smirk he had earlier, with a shy, "Sorry." Once we took off, I found it very hot in there, and needed to remove my zip-up hoodie. Of course, this required standing up and lots of arms flailing backwards to remove it. Smirk, "Sorry." Finally, refreshments made their way over. Being in the middle, I politely passed window seat guy his drink. Then, "Oh my god, so sorry," smirk. I clumsily mishandled mine and splashed the poor fellow. Snacks came shortly after. Who knew trail mix would travel like a confetti blaster if you opened the bag with too much force? Smirk, "So very sorry." The next story is titled, Knew I Was Getting Fired, so I scattered 200 business cards around the office in various inconspicuous places. I was working for a staffing agency as the branch sales manager a few years back. My new boss was and is a complete shothead. Had no idea what he was doing, had never worked in the industry, started pitting managers against each other to determine loyalty and support. We had a small office in the back of ours that he would use from time to time. One day, when I was in the office taking some lunch, I found that he was still logged into his email. Considering how much I disliked him, I snooped. I found out I was getting fired. Sucked, but I had a few irons in the fire already, so I was ready to move on. I immediately started hiding what was left of my business cards all over the office. In individual files, taped under keyboards, under desks, under chairs, taped to the back of the wall decor, between sheets of copy paper, all over the place. I still have a friend who works there, and after 4 years, they still find a random card somewhere in the office at times. It's a nice reminder of how they screwed me. My boss was fired about a year later for bad production. The branch is bleeding to this day. The next story is titled, Smug Karen Takes My Car Keys Because I Can't Possibly Be the Owner. Earns herself a ride in the back seat of one of our country's finest. This is just a throwaway because I don't care to stick around for long, but this incident was so stupid that I can't really help but share this story since my friends keep telling me to. What I find most weird about this is that my car wasn't anything super special. It was just a yellow '09 V6 Chevy Camaro with black stripes. When I bought it, it was super cheap because the passenger side door had been smashed in somehow and there was already 130,000 miles on the odometer. But the title was still good somehow. No idea why, nor do I really care. It was sold to me via proxy. All I know was the car looked like a good deal, so I bought it. A friend of mine who works in auto body fixed it for me. He said that most of the damage was to the door itself, and I just needed a new door after he made a few tweaks to make sure everything was straight. Together, we managed to find a door at a salvage yard that was the same color. A little work, and the car looked almost new, and it became my fun ride to commute to work or drive around when I didn't feel like using my other car. I didn't do any modifications to it. I'm not one of those guys that's into speed or crazy mods. I liked the car because it looked cool, and the gas mileage wasn't so bad with the V6. In fact, I wanted a V6 Camaro because I heard that they're usually in better condition than ones with a V8, because people drive the V6 more for looks than power, and don't gas it as much. I drove that Camaro for a year before running into a random Karen at a supermarket last year in September. Those places tend to draw Karens in regularly, especially in the state I live in. I've seen many Karens, but was lucky to hardly ever be noticed by them. I was shopping for some stuff to make dinner, and was about to head home when I found the Karen with her young son all over my car after exiting the store. I'm guessing the boy was about 4 years old, and his mother was taking pictures of the kid sitting on my hood, while the kid kept smiling and gleefully saying, "Bumblebee!" Yes, I understand the reference, and I've heard it all before. I don't like people messing with my property, and told the kid to get off. The Karen took one look at me, and told me to mind my own business. Now, I'm 29M, but I have a bit of a baby face, and my casual clothing made me look like a teenager, so I guess to her, I couldn't be someone who'd have anything to do with such a nice car. That's actually a pretty common car. I told the Karen to get off my Camaro, and she bluntly told me there was no way it was my car because I'm too young. I pulled out my keys and hit the alarm button on the remote. That made the alarm start blaring for a second, and her kid jumped off while screaming and crying because I'd frightened him. But rather than pay attention to her crying child, the Karen came running at me full speed and managed to shove me hard enough that I fell over. The next part is a bit hazy. I got a bump on the head, and that crazy idiot slurred every word she was screaming at me. She stepped on my arm and pulled the keys from my hand before I really had a chance to react, though she didn't really hurt me much. She was not a big woman, only around 5'2" or so, and a twig, while I'm 6 foot and over 170 pounds. When I got to my feet, she was comforting her crying kid and telling him that I was a mean person. I told her to return my keys, but she got hissy and said there was no way the Camaro was mine. I again stated it was, and I would only give her one more chance to return my keys. She didn't. Instead, she handed them to her kid, who proceeded to start playing with the buttons on the remote and unlocked the doors. I had enough and got my phone out to call the police. When the Karen saw I was on the phone, she started screaming and charging at me again. Though this time I easily dodged her, and she nearly fell on the asphalt and screamed I'd assaulted her. I never even touched her, and said as much out loud. The 911 operator was listening to everything that was going on, and I quickly told her where we were while this insane woman was still screaming at me, and 2 police cars had shown up before long. At this point, the Karen had locked herself in my car with her son and started the engine to run the AC. I explained everything to the police, and they knocked on the window of my Camaro to get the Karen to open it and give them her side of the story. She claimed the car to be hers, and that I was just some stupid, broke-ass teenager that tried to carjack her. Then bragged that she'd taken me down. The officer asked if that meant she'd shoved me over, to which she bluntly said yes. I told the police to look in my glove compartment. In there was my insurance card and a copy of my registration, and they could compare the name on my license. When the Karen heard that, she got out of the car and finally admitted it wasn't hers, but then said there was no way it could be mine, and that she just took the keys from me to find the real owner. That quickly earned her some shiny new bracelets, and she was put screaming into the back of a police car. The parking lot had cameras, so it was easy to prove the assault, though I only really got scratches, a bruise on my arm where she'd stepped on it, and a small bump on the head. After the Karen was taken back to the station, they found she was high on drugs, which explains why she was so nuts. I of course pressed charges. though my testimony wasn't really needed since the police had both CCTV from the parking lot and the audio from my phone call. It turned out to be the Karen's third offense, and she got 2 years in prison. Oh, and her kid was taken from her. The whole incident made me rethink owning the Camaro, because it had been a magnet for people that bothered me a lot. So, I sold it. Basically got back everything I had into it anyway, so I broke even. I doubt I'll want to own another sports car again. The next story is titled, Your Dream House? I'm a city planner, and one of my jobs is code enforcement of unsafe properties. Today, a coworker gave me the dark history of one of our town's boarded-up homes, and I had to share this story. This man built his wife her dream house. She loved it intensely. Later, during their very ugly divorce, he fought like hell for the house and gave in on every other point of contention so he could keep the house. After he won it, he proceeded to not just let the vagrants and junkies move in, but actually invited them to live there. Thieves stole the wiring and appliances. Vandals broke the windows. He let the trashed property get condemned as unsafe, and eventually got called into City Hall for an infraction, where he gleefully relayed the story to my coworker. The man was happily letting the bank repossess the destroyed house, getting cited for nuisances, and going bankrupt. All to get back at his ex-wife. The last story is titled, Robbery Turns into Exercise for the Robber. I know that there's a post on an Ask Reddit question that sounds very similar to this. I'm shocked that two members of humans could share this level of stupidity. Here's what happened. I was sitting in the parking lot of my local Walmart, waiting for a call from my friend on what he needed from the store. He's currently got some nasty food poisoning or something and has been projectile vomiting for a day or two. My window's down a bit because it's nice outside. Out of nowhere, a guy runs up to my car, knife in hand, and shoves it into the gap between the doorframe and the window. He's flailing it like a dying fish at my neck, and I freak out. I shriek like a little girl, almost piss my pants, and jab at the window button to close the window. He starts shrieking and drops the knife and tries to pull his arm out. He's not even gotten around to demanding my money. I fumble my phone and call the police. I'm pissed at this guy. Who wouldn't be? He's cursing and bashing my car and is threatening to murder me and my lineage, so I tell him to shut up. He doesn't, so I put it in drive and take my foot off the brake. He's caught off guard and starts saying, "What the duck are you doing?" I don't answer and tap the gas. Long story short, I took him around that parking lot for about 5 minutes before the police showed up. By the time they did, he'd lost a shoe and was totally out of breath. Yes, I'm a petty little craphead. No, I didn't get the knife, they took it for evidence. Yes, my window got messed up. And yes, someone I knew heard me shriek like a little pansy. I'm not living it down. I'm just hoping that the officer was right about him not having grounds to sue me for unlawful imprisonment or something like that. 1 out of 10, do not recommend. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.
I'm just left confused where her entitled and condescending attitude came from. I get we all have bad days, but you don't have to take it out on your customers. As I'm leaving with my 2 carts, I glance over to the adjacent checkout line where she was, and she just looks over and gives a cocky smile. I just shake my head and keep walking. The 150-year-old McAllister farmstead was my pride and joy. 3 generations of my family had lived on and worked this beautiful plot of land in the heart of the countryside. The weathered red barn, stately farmhouse, and rolling green pastures were my sanctuary, filled with cherished memories from a lifetime of tradition. I remember as a child my grandfather Wilbur telling me stories as we walked together through the golden fields, his weathered hands gently guiding mine as he taught me about the cycles of life on a farm. After he passed, my father took over the daily tasks of tending the land, but Grandpa Wilbur's spirit lived on. When I finished school, I happily settled into my role as a humble farmer, nurturing the crops and livestock as my ancestors had done. The years went by peacefully as they always had. Neighbors came and went, new houses cropped up along the main road over time, but our expansive farmland remained untouched, a refreshing constant in the ever-changing world around us. That is, until she arrived. Barbara Blackwell, the self-appointed Homeowners Association president of the new housing development Oak Tree Estates. She drove her shiny black Mercedes down our dirt road one muggy June morning, waving paperwork out the window as she pulled up to the house. nearly trampling my prize-winning pumpkins. "Good news!" she exclaimed, her peppy voice grating on my nerves instantaneously. "Oak Tree Estates just expanded and purchased a chunk of your unused land. You're officially part of our Happy Homeowners Association family now." I was stunned speechless as she prattled on about joining fees, committees, neighborhood barbecues, and her grand plans to modernize the area. Modernize? This was McAllister farmland, not a plot in her plastic cookie cutter subdivision. Anger bubbled up inside me. Over the next weeks, Barbara dropped by daily, each time with new demands. Paint color approvals, tree trimming, even wanting to install a community garden in my south pasture, and repeated threats to get my eyesore farm in line with Homeowners Association guidelines. Through gritted teeth, I asked her to leave every time, but the final straw was the day I found posts installed along my back fence. A construction crew ready to start building on what they thought was now Homeowners Association property. Furious, I called the county clerk and my lawyer, Uncle Bill. The deed Barbara kept waving around was a fake. This was outright land theft. Uncle Bill helped me file an injunction to stop the construction. The battle had begun. Over the next months, Barbara's friendly mask slipped, revealing her true vindictive nature. She poured sugar in my gas tank, knocked down yard decorations, and threatened to poison my livestock. Meanwhile, her lawyer was no match for Uncle Bill in court. Her phony papers were proven fraudulent. The judge ruled in my favor. She had no claim to my family's farm. Just when I thought it was over, Uncle Bill uncovered something even more shocking. As Homeowners Association president, Barbara had siphoned tens of thousands in association fees into her personal accounts. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her white-collar crimes. Justice was sweet. In the end, I settled back into my pastoral life, thankful to have escaped that bitter, entitled woman's clutches. The future of my family's farm is secure. Come what may, this land will remain our legacy, to be passed down for generations to come. Update? I thought Barbara Blackwell was out of my life for good, but last week she turned up yet again like a bad penny. Out on parole, she had the audacity to apply for a job on my farm. I kindly told her she wasn't welcome here. Some people just don't know when to quit. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This subreddit has gotten me through a lot of boredom and has provided me with hours of entertainment. I figure it's my turn to tell my revenge story. So it's been about 4 years since this happened. I was about 18 at the time, working for a security company. There were constant call-offs and no-shows. I have no idea why. But being so young and naive, I was constantly working 16-hour shifts and not coming home until 8 a.m. Also, I lived with my father at the time. The time frame of this was around the 4th of July. I finally had a day off, and my best friend was back in town for vacation. We decided to get together and chip in on some good old American fireworks. To be fair, I have had nothing but bad experiences with fireworks, so I had no idea how this would be any different. We got home with the fireworks, and we laid them all out on the floor. Sparklers, bottle rockets, cakes, and Roman candles. I said, "Why don't we mess around with some sparklers since it's still not dark yet?" Great idea. We went into my backyard where it hadn't rained in well over 2 months, and it was extremely dry. You see the problem here? One of the little sparkies from my friends and my sparkler made contact with the ground and started 2 small fires that quickly spread to a large area. I ran as fast as I could to grab the garden hose and quickly started spraying down the fire. It was no use, it was spreading faster than I could spray it. I handed my friend the hose and called cop. What felt like hours was only 4 minutes, and the fire was spreading to the neighbor's fence. The neighbor came outside, and they were fairly calm. They grabbed their hose and sprayed down the fence along with the dead grass in her yard. The fire department finally showed up, and I told my friend, "Only one of us needs to get in trouble, you should leave." He was reluctant to leave because he felt equally responsible, but I convinced him. I didn't want him to get in trouble and have to drop out of college. My neighbor was super chill about the entire situation at first. I told her that we could talk about replacing the fence and get some quotes to repair it. She was just super grateful that everyone was okay. About 2 hours after the fire, the arson fire investigator came to question me about the fire. I told him the truth. I said I was in the backyard by myself playing with fireworks and accidentally lit the ground on fire. I got off that day without facing any charges and was commended for being honest. Here is where it goes downhill very fast. About a week later, I get a knock on the door from the neighbor. I opened the door and she handed me 2 pieces of paper to look at. There was a quote for the fence valued at around $4,000, and an estimate for lawn care valued around $6,000. These were really shady, and just typed out on a Microsoft Word document. No logo or company name. She then adds, I will also be having you pay my water bill for 3 months because the new yard will need lots of water. Now, the fence this woman had before was raggedy and falling apart. Her yard, dead grass, weeds everywhere, never mowed it. Now, looking at this paper, she wants a mahogany fence and a brand new backyard with flowers and trimmed hedges. I said, I need to get an estimate myself. This doesn't feel right. She says, remember, you agreed to replace my fence, and a real man keeps promises. I shut the door and called my dad to tell him about what just happened. He flipped out and told me, son, don't you give that slut a single dime. He gave me the number to his handyman and told me to take care of it. The next day I had the guy come out for an estimate, and the neighbor ran outside flailing her arms, saying, I did not give you permission to get an estimate on my fence. Technically, it separates the property line, so it's both of our fences. She called the cops on me for having a contractor, and they ultimately couldn't do a single thing because I'm on my property. He quickly finishes the estimate at $1,200. I also knew a guy who did lawn care from my time working at the grocery store. He estimated the lawn reseeding while she was away from the house to be about $800. After I got these estimates, I gave copies to the woman, and she wasn't pleased. I don't know these people. I don't want them near my house. They're probably really crappy contractors. I said, no, I know them personally. They are really nice people and do great work. She shut the door in my face, and I went on my way. I ended up working a 16-hour shift that night and got home at 8 a.m. This woman comes knocking on my door at 9 a.m. and demands I speak to her. I explained, I would really love to do this, but I just got home, and I have to be back at work in less than 5 hours. I need to sleep. She goes, what kind of lazy asshat sleeps in until 2 p.m.? At this point, I had about lost it and told her, you can either accept my $2,000 for my quotes or kiss my ass and get nothing. She stood there for a while with her mouth gaping open, but she accepted my offer and planned to meet down at the notary the next morning. I spent that night after I got off work writing a contract and gathering the $2,000 in cash. The next morning, I woke up and grabbed this contract to meet down at the notary. I was thrilled to finally be done with this woman and never speak to her again. I waited for her for over 3 hours and she didn't show up. I got a call from her saying, I'm sorry, the $2,000 isn't enough. I'm having my guys start work on this project and you will be paying me the full price. Oh, really? After that, I did not say a single word to her, and I watched for a few months as these guys turned her backyard into an oasis, complete with a small pond, brand new sod, and flowers, the whole 9 yards. Come to find out, she had plans to remodel these things for a long time and was just waiting for the opportunity to go through with it. Also, during this time, she used her remodel funds to go on a trip to Hawaii. You know how I found out about this? She was bragging about it on the neighborhood Facebook group and didn't know I was in it. I have a different Facebook name than my real name. Are you ready for the revenge? Now, 4 months after the fire and all the remodels, I got served papers to go to court for $10,300. At 18 years old, I'm having to hire a lawyer to work my case. When we finally got into court, I laid everything out. The quotes, being harassed multiple times, not showing up after agreeing to a deal, not wanting me to get my own quotes, required by law, by the way, and her bragging about screwing me out of money, and I had proof of all of this. The judge looked at her and said, Ma'am, with all due respect, you're out of your damn mind. Not only did this young man tell the truth of what happened, but he also offered to pay you more than he was supposed to. Your lawn was already dead before the fire occurred, therefore he is only responsible for the fence, which amounts to $1,200. I will also deduct his lawyer fees, $800, from this amount. So, I burned this woman's fence down, and all I have to give her is $400? Cool. She took a huge financial loss from this. I'm not sure how much the Hawaii trip cost her, but she was in serious debt. She ended up having to sell the house because of it and moved into a smaller one. I haven't heard anything from her since. The next one is a petty revenge story. This is a tale my mom told me about an encounter she had with a wild Karen and how she got a little bit of revenge against her for being, well, a Karen. This took place some years back when I was in high school. Not sure if they still do, but at the time my old high school held an annual charity auction. All kinds of items of all shapes and sizes were donated to the school for this event. A traditional auction was held in the gym for the bigger, more expensive items, while the smaller items were delegated to silent auctions in the cafeteria and hallways. If you don't know how a silent auction works, in this case, the items were set out on a table, each with a sheet of paper where interested parties could write down their names and how much they wanted to bid. Each table had a little timer to indicate how long the silent auction lasted, and a pen so guests could write down their bids. One year, my parents decided to attend the auction. The items on sale in the gym were a bit too pricey, so my mom decided to focus on some of the silent auction items. When they arrived, she spotted a few she was interested in, wrote down a bid, and she and my dad went off to enjoy the rest of the event. Sometime later, my mom went wandering again and happened upon one table, just as the timer on it was about to run out. This table had one of the items she bid on, and she was still the highest bidder, until Karen entered the picture and outbid her. Under normal circumstances, my mom would have been content to let the item go, wanting it but not bad enough to start a bidding war over it. However, she changed her tune after witnessing what Karen did next. There's only one pen per table, and to ensure no one tried to outbid her, once Karen finished writing her bid, she proceeded to hold the pen to her chest, like Gollum clutching the One Ring. Needless to say, Karen wanted to win no matter what, and refused to give up the pen even when politely asked. Not taking too kindly to cheaters, my dearest mother decided it was time Karen was taught a lesson with a bit of petty revenge. There was a student monitoring the tables, and she asked him if he had a spare pen, which he did. She took this pen and proceeded to write down her next bid very, very slowly. Remember when I said that my mom arrived just as the table's timer was almost up? Well, there was less than a minute left, and my mom wrote as slowly as possible to stall for time so Karen couldn't follow up with another bid. Karen tried, of course. Upon seeing what my mom was doing, Karen took her coveted pen and tried to write in another bid under my mom's name while she was still writing, but my mom, being left-handed and Karen right-handed, positioned her hand and arm in such a way that Karen couldn't get in. When my mom told me the story, she demonstrated all the ways Karen tried to squeeze in, and it was hilarious. Mom kept an eye on the clock, and when there were only a few seconds left, she quickly finished writing her bid, and that was that. She won. The student prevented Karen from trying to write another bid, and Karen walked away defeated. Moral of the story: play fair and don't be a jerk. You never know who is watching and what it will bring out in people. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Florida recently passed a controversial bathroom law, which requires individuals to use the restroom corresponding to the gender specified on their birth certificate. I identify as non-binary and have faced medical challenges since childhood that were disregarded by doctors, resulting in the removal of my reproductive organs and parts of my intestine. Later, I chose to undergo additional procedures as a preventative measure against cancer. Although I haven't pursued hormone replacement therapy, HRT, my appearance is now quite androgynous. I'm not particularly concerned about the pronouns people use for me, and my wife playfully switches between them based on what she finds amusing at the time. At work, we were informed that the law would be strictly enforced, and any staff member who violated it could face police involvement, not just disciplinary action. It's worth noting that our building only has one gender-neutral restroom, located in the administrative offices, and it requires buzzing in. Once inside, you need to contact a facility's staff member to unlock the door, and security closely monitors its use. They place a great emphasis on maintaining a certain level of control around here. Unfortunately, I was reported for using the wrong restroom, even though it aligns with the gender on my birth certificate. To be honest, I don't mind which restroom I use, and in the past, I've used whichever was available due to my frequent bathroom visits resulting from the aforementioned surgery in my IBS. This incident vividly demonstrates the absurdity of this law and how it will inevitably lead to discrimination based solely on appearance. When I was informed of the report, I made it clear that I was abiding by the law. Luckily, I didn't face any consequences, but I was told to be mindful of how others perceive me. That's when I decided to comply, but with a twist. I've exclusively started using the administrative restroom, intentionally wasting the time of multiple individuals. I press the buzzer and make someone unlock the door for me. I've already filed a complaint about the delayed response time, highlighting the potential violation of Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA regulations, due to the denial of restroom access. I make sure to use the restroom after administrative hours, ensuring that security and facilities personnel must come up to report the incident. Furthermore, I plan to file a complaint each time I wait longer than 5 minutes for their arrival. During closing hours, when I'm on the floor, I inform the manager on duty that I can't check and clear both restrooms. Instead, I ask them to find another staff member and interrupt their closing duties, reminding them that failure to comply could lead to police involvement. Many of my colleagues are enjoying this and providing support by doing the same during closing. It helps that we're now receiving an extra 15 minutes of overtime pay due to the closing procedures. Our time clock rounds to the nearest 15 minutes, and this applies to everyone in the building. Consequently, approximately 20 people accumulate overtime each day, which adds up over time. After confronting me about why I'm using their restroom, an individual from the administrative team mentioned that they are currently exploring the possibility of converting our existing restrooms into gender-neutral facilities. I welcome the idea, but I also informed them that I will continue to use the administrative restroom until the changes are made. Some of my co-workers have expressed their intention to do the same. While the law itself is still problematic, my hope is that through persistent annoyance, we can at least bring about change within our district. The next one is an entitled people story. I just left my job of 5 years for reasons unrelated to this event, but it's had me thinking about some moments throughout my tenure there in which I encountered people who demonstrated the most absolute unmitigated gall. I was an events curator for a culture and arts organization, and I was part of a pretty small team, which meant my colleagues and I filled every role possible when we ran events. We worked the door, checked tickets, introduced the events, and held Q&As with panelists, then bartended afterward if there was a wine reception. It wasn't easy for guests to figure out exactly what we did there since we were all over the place. Often we had a lot of entitled people, EPs, talking to us like they thought we were waitstaff, which obviously it's not acceptable to talk to waitstaff this way either, when we poured drinks. What they didn't realize was that, 1, my colleagues and I are not in food service or customer service of any kind. There is no manager to complain about us, and we make the rules and reserve the right to refuse service to anybody for any reason. There is no corporate we answer to, etc. 2, these were 100% free events with complimentary wine and snacks occasionally, so we were under no obligation to give EPs more than a small glass of our wine or a taste of the food we served. We weren't there to get people loaded or feed them dinner, and that pissed off quite a few people over the years. We grew to recognize the ones who came to our events just to get free wine and snacks and didn't hesitate to set boundaries with them and ban people who tried to take advantage of the complimentary receptions. After one event, we were serving food and wine, and the crowd bum-rushed the bar and formed a huge line. There was one single combined line for the food and wine since we set it up for guests to get a plate of the food first, then get a pre-poured glass of wine. A few people politely asked if they could skip the line and go straight to the wine because they didn't want food, and my colleagues and I politely let them know in return that there was enough wine and food for everybody, so if everybody waited in the same line, they would still get the wine they wanted. We wanted to avoid creating a second line just for people who only wanted wine and generating unnecessary confusion. The polite people understood and waited in line, and sure enough, there was still enough for them when they reached the bar. Enter an EP, a feisty elderly man I'd recognized as a grabby hands, aka those who come just for free stuff, type from past events. He charges around the side of the line to the front of the bar where I'm pouring wine and says to me, "Just give me 2 glasses of wine." Me. That's what everybody else in the line is waiting for too. Him. But they're waiting for food and wine. I just want the wine. Just give me 2 glasses. Me. There are other people in line who also just want wine. Him. Just give me the 2 glasses. Me. No, you're not cutting. You can get in line and wait like everybody else. Him. Oh, duck you, man. Me. You can say that if you want, but you're still not cutting. You're being rude to everybody else. Him. You're the one being rude. Me. I'm being rude, but you're the one yelling duck you to a stranger. Him. Duck you. Me.
having already put in my month's notice and not giving a crap anymore. Duck you too, man. He goes back to where his presumably wife is standing, and I hear him call me an a-hole. His wife, and this is where this story gets, and the whole train clapped vibes, but I swear it happened like this, says, "No, you're being an a-hole." I was kind of shocked to hear her try to put him in his place, since I'm used to EPs coming in pairs when it comes to married folk. Anyway, having heard her response, I look over at him and give a kind of, "I told you so" look, to which he tells "duck you" again. I said, I should kick you out. You don't just get to go around talking to people like that. We have poor security protocol in place for these events, which was why I said I should kick him out, but ultimately couldn't unless I told our receptionist to call the police. The guy huffs, "You know what, we'll just leave instead." I answered, "Even better." He stormed out with his wife in tow. I felt really bad for her. She must have been so embarrassed that she didn't even look at or speak to me and my colleagues as they left. Poor lady, having to deal with a guy like that for who knows how many years.
The next one is an entitled people story.
You know that phrase, "Good fences make good neighbors"? Well, let me tell you, no fence in the world could have protected me from the neighbor I got stuck with. Karen was the name, and being a pain was her game. See, I own a nice little farmstead out in the country. 40 acres of land that's been in my family for generations. I grow vegetables, raise some livestock, and sell produce at the farmer's market on weekends. It's honest work, and I enjoy the peace and quiet of country living. That all changed when Miss Karen moved in next door. Right from the start, she made it clear she didn't like my farm being so close to her property. See, Karen was one of those hoity-toity lawyer types who thought cows and chickens had no place in her pristine neighborhood. She'd come marching over in her pantsuit and heels whenever my rooster crowed at dawn, threatening to sue me for noise pollution, and heaven forbid if my cows got loose and wandered near her yard. She'd call the police screaming about how I was letting dangerous animals run wild. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that this was farm country, and she'd have to get used to the sounds and smells that came with it. But there was no talking sense into that woman. She was convinced I was doing it all just to annoy her personally. Things escalated when I decided to build a pond on my property. I thought it would be nice for my ducks and geese, plus provide irrigation for my fields. I got all the necessary permits from the county and had a contractor come out to dig it. Well, Karen about blew a gasket when she saw the construction starting up. She came racing over, waving some legal papers around and shouting that I didn't have permission to alter the natural landscape. I told her to get lost, that it was my land and I could build a pond if I wanted to. Next thing I know, I get served with an injunction from Karen's law firm, trying to stop construction on the pond. Her complaint stated it would obstruct her view and create an eyesore. Plus, she claimed the pond would attract mosquitoes and vermin that would interfere with her enjoyment of her property. I had to hire my own lawyer just to fight her nonsense lawsuit. After months of delays and piles of legal fees, the judge finally ruled in my favor, saying I was completely within my rights to build the pond. Karen was fuming when she lost the case. I reckon she wasn't used to folks standing up to her bullying tactics. But did that stop her? Nope, it only made her angrier and more determined to make my life difficult. Anytime I made improvements to my farm, she found ways to interfere. When I put up a new barn, she complained it was too close to the property line. When I planted an orchard, she whined about how the trees blocked her view. This crazy woman even called the EPA when I spread manure on my fields, claiming I was polluting the environment. Her relentless harassment was wasting my time and money. I tried talking to her nicely, ignoring her, even threatening to get a restraining order. But Karen didn't let up. I realized I was dealing with an unstable, vindictive person, but had no idea how far she would go. That is, until I came home one afternoon to find bulldozers tearing down the fence that marked the boundary with Karen's place. Before I could even react, half my pasture was destroyed, including the field I'd planted for this year's pumpkin crop. I saw Karen standing there in her business suit, leaning on a fence post with a satisfied smirk on her face. When I ran over screaming for her to stop, she pulled out another legal document saying she had a right to clear the land. "This portion is on my property according to the survey," she said smugly. "I'm within my rights to alter the land however I want. Maybe next time you'll think twice before you build ponds without my permission." I saw red. Bad enough she'd been making my life hell for months, but now she was outright destroying my livelihood. I called the sheriff right then and there. Seeing as she'd hired a crew to come bulldoze land she didn't actually own, the cops had no choice but to arrest her for trespassing and destruction of private property. Watching Karen get cuffed and stuffed into the back of the squad car felt like sweet justice after the hell she'd put me through. And the look on her face when they hauled her off to jail? Priceless. For once, she was speechless. At the trial, Karen's lawyer tried arguing that she'd made an honest mistake based on the property survey. Yeah, right. The judge didn't buy her innocent act either. Karen ended up with a misdemeanor conviction, 2 years of probation, and a restraining order prohibiting her from coming near my farm. She also had to pay a huge fine and restitution for the damage and lost income from my destroyed crops. Let's just say her little stunt ended up costing her big time. Losing that case was a major blow to her overinflated ego. She had to sell her place just to cover her losses. Last I heard, she'd moved to the city where she couldn't cause trouble for us simple country folk no more. As for me, the peace and quiet on my farm has never been better. I replaced that fence and planted my pumpkin field again, too. My animals and crops are thriving with nosy old Karen far away where she belongs. Sometimes life has a funny way of working out in the end. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So this isn't my story. It happened to a friend of a friend, so exact details are difficult to get, but this is what I was told. For ease of the story and to hide identities, the names I will use are Jack and Jill. A bit of backstory. Jack and Jill had been going out for nearly 5 years at the point of this story. A year prior, Jill lost her job due to the company she worked for being liquidated. Money got tight for Jill, so Jack offered to help by covering her car payments, monthly installment, road tax, insurance, and fuel, so she could put the money she got towards rent and utilities until she got a new job and was financially stable. Jack had a fairly decent job, so it wasn't a strain on his income. A year goes by and Jill is still unemployed, but not due to rejections. She got lazy and spent all day doing nothing around her house while Jack was at work. One day, Jack gets off work early and decides to surprise Jill on the way back home. But as he is approaching her house, he sees another car in her driveway. He parks on the street and sneaks up to the house, looking through the window to see Jill with another man. Jack was pissed, but he didn't burst in there. He walked away, got into his car, and drove off. When Jack got home, he did a little digging and found out who the guy was through Facebook. He discovered that she had been having an affair for half a year with this guy. He was now really pissed off and wanted revenge, and he knew the best way to do it. This is where the revenge comes in. Jill loved her car, even though she barely used it. So what Jack did was stop all the payments that were going out of his bank account and put them onto her account. Since the car was in her name, it was easy to do. As the payments had only just gone out, he had to wait for the end of the month for his revenge to unfold. The end of the month comes and Jill's bank card is declined at the shops. She calls the bank to find out what is going on, and they tell her she has gone overdrawn because of the car payments coming out of her account. Jill phoned Jack and asked why the payment is coming out of her account and not his. Jack coldly replied, "'Cause I know you cheated on me and I'm not going to pay for my ex-girlfriend's car," and hung up. The fallout of the revenge. She tried to get Jack to pay for the car and even got lawsuits involved, but as she was the sole owner of the car, it was declared that he had no legal responsibility to pay for her car. Since she couldn't afford her road tax or insurance, she couldn't drive the car, and eventually she got so far behind in the payments that the car was repossessed. To pay the debt, she had to get a minimum wage job and now takes the bus to and from work. The next one is a petty revenge story. Many years ago, I used to work nights and shared a cubicle workspace with someone who worked during the day. Let's call her Karen. Karen apparently believed that the entire cubicle belonged to her, and that nobody else was allowed to sit there. Everything was labeled with her name, and she would even lock the desk. I had to get a separate file cabinet just so I could store my files and belongings since she wasn't willing to share. She had little knickknacks, figures, placed all over the desk in inconvenient areas, making it difficult for me to work. So I would simply move them to the monitor stand to keep them out of the way. Being short while she was tall, I would adjust the seat, monitor, and phone to make myself comfortable. I hated feeling like a little kid with my feet dangling. Fast forward a few weeks of going through the routine of moving the figures and adjusting the workspace to suit my needs. One day I arrived to find an 11x14 piece of paper taped to the monitor with an aggressive note. Night person, do not move my stuff. It's not yours to touch. And stop adjusting the seat and monitor because it's not ergonomically correct, blah blah blah. I showed the letter to my manager and demonstrated how the desk was when I arrived, and then after I adjusted it. He laughed and said she was crazy, telling me to continue adjusting it to better suit my needs, and that she could do the same when she came in. And so, the petty revenge began. I started rearranging everything into random configurations on a daily basis for a couple of weeks. One day, I would have the monitor in front of the desk with everything stacked behind it like a pyramid. On another day, I would unplug the phone from its base and put the mouse in its place. I even left the seat upside down. And so on. I recruited my coworkers to join in the fun, and together we would redesign the layout each time. It reminded me of what Jim used to do to Dwight in the office, although we didn't go as far as putting her stapler in Jell-O. Note, removed the special character from Jim in the original text. My friend worked in a cubicle 2 spaces away from Karen, conveniently next to the manager's office, and informed me that Karen would stomp past her every day to complain to the manager about the night person who was destroying her belongings and making it difficult for her to work. Of course, she conveniently left out the fact that she had initiated this whole petty revenge by leaving a note. After about a week of her constant complaining, the manager finally asked if anything was missing or broken. She replied, well, no, but fed up with her nonsense, they cut her off and instructed her to readjust things to her needs and to only report to them if anything was vandalized. It was amusing to hear from my friend how agitated Karen was each morning, not knowing what she would find. I never saw another note from Karen, but about a year later, she was assigned to work nights. She told a few of us about the situation, playing the victim, and asked if we had any idea who could have been responsible. The cubicle was empty because I had been promoted and no longer sat at her desk by that time. She must have expected me to be thrown under the bus given the cutthroat nature of the day crew. Little did she know the night crew was ride or die. We all acted clueless and burst into laughter the moment she stepped outside. No, Karen, the cubicle does not belong to you. Others are allowed to use it and adjust items according to their needs. You're not entitled to it. The next one is a malicious compliance story. When I, F43, was 19, 20 years old, I worked at the local franchise of a popular steakhouse buffet as a cashier and hostess. On our busier days, table turnover could be insane, and me having to help clean a table to seat was a normal thing. Servers bust their own tables. We, of course, would seat tables that were already clean, but sometimes customers would prefer a different location that wasn't. Since it was a buffet, this wasn't a huge problem. We would clean while they filled plates. On one very memorable occasion, this happened to me with a bit of a twist. I took a party to a clean table in Blondie's section. I don't know how old she was, but I would wager early 20s, and she had been there longer than I had. Anyway, when we got there, the head of the party said they would prefer a different table, still in Blondie's section, and indicated one that had not been cleaned yet. I flashed my best customer service smile and said it would not be a problem. They started to turn away, and I prepared to clean the table for them. All of a sudden, Blondie rushed up to me and said that table was unavailable, and would another table be okay instead? I explained the situation and that they had chosen that table specifically, but she was adamant. She explained that she wanted that table and another available to merge for large parties. Tips are almost always better with a large group. I apologized profusely to the current party I was seating and asked if the new table would suffice. They assured me it was all right and took everything in stride as they made their way to the food. The next time Blondie went into the dish area in the kitchen, less than 10 minutes later, I followed her in and proceeded to tear her a new one. It felt really weird to be so thoroughly dressing down anyone older than me. I was raised with old school morals and ideas of respect for those older than me. But she had embarrassed me, and I told her so, and that what she had done made it look like I didn't know how to do my job. She apologized but held her stance. I was still fuming, so I did what anyone with a teenager brain would do. I went to Mom, or rather the head server and her supervisor. I told Mom what she had done and why, and she told me that's fine. If she wants large tables, she can have them, for the next at least 15 to 20 minutes, Every large group that came in was seated in her section. Remember, busy day, so this was frequent. She eventually came up to the hostess station to ask me to stop. I told her to talk to Mom. The next one is an entitled people story. This was over 20 years ago. I was invited to a coworker's wedding, and it was a small budget / big energy event. The ceremony was to be held in a garden, and there were going to be more people than seats. The invitation politely asked that the seating be reserved for immediate family and those who might need it more than others. I arrived and met my other coworkers. We were all young and fit then, so standing was no issue for us. We were there early and secured a spot near the front and close to the chairs. The chairs were divided into 2 sections with a path in the middle, and the front row of each section was reserved for the bride and groom's family. The rest of the chairs were up for grabs. A couple arrived, both in their late 20s, and took the seats at the end of the row behind the bride's family row, just near us. The man of the couple did not look well, and he had no hair. A few people made their way over to say hello to him. He smiled as he talked and seemed happy to be there. The chairs filled up quickly with older attendees, and those who arrived later took standing positions at the sides like us. I checked my watch, and the start time was not far away. A few minutes later, I saw a young woman walk in. She was in her early 20s and walked close to the chairs, looking around as if she was searching for someone. She made her way up near us, then tapped the unwell man on the shoulder. I thought she might have known him until I heard her say, "Excuse me, can I have that seat?" He looked at her as if he didn't understand, so she helped him by repeating, "Can I have that seat?" "Why?" he asked, and I had the same question. "Because you're a man and I'm a woman. You should be a gentleman and offer me that seat." Suddenly, every conversation nearby stopped. People turned and looked. The bride's family in the front row must have known this man, and they all turned around. A few of them stood up and seemed about to interject when the man's partner leaned in front of him and said loudly, "He has cancer and he needs to sit down, okay?" The young woman looked around and realized that she had attracted a lot of attention. "How was I supposed to know?" she protested, and then quickly walked away, disappearing into the crowd behind the chairs. End note. The wedding went well after that. I spoke to my coworker when he returned from his honeymoon, and the man turned out to be his wife's cousin. The young woman was his wife's coworker, but they were not close. Over the following years, I learned that the man ended up beating cancer and became a father. I do not know what happened to the young woman because I never asked. The next one is an entitled parent story. This isn't my first post on here. I am a 23-year-old nanny and have posted entitled parent stories from that job, but I also hold another position as a cashier at night weekends, and I finally have one from this job, so I work as a cashier at a 24-hour grocery store. This particular store, while we do technically have a corporate office and are a chain in a way, is privately owned, and the employees are considered the owners because we invest part of our pay into the company. While we have management and supervisors, we are given broad discretion with denying service and throwing people out. Basically, if you have a good reason and they can see it in our cameras, there is a good reason we are good to go. Okay, now for the story. It was a busy Saturday afternoon just a few days ago, and we were packed to the point the lines are wrapped around aisles. So it is loud, busy, packed, and hot. I'm tired and see it's only about 30 minutes till my shift ends. And I'm trying to keep up my nice smile and customer service voice. Briefly to my side, I hear a kid yell. He looks about 3-ish. Not like a tantrum, but like just angry, trying to get mom's attention. I ignore him because kids having tantrums or getting angry is normal. I start talking to the lady in front of me and I hear the kid, who, by the way, was actually quite sweet. He yells again for Mom. "Mom, I want my juice." Now he was yelling, but it was nowhere close to a tantrum or a fit. His family was the next in line. Frankly, if he'd been in a different line, I probably wouldn't have noticed at all. In my opinion, he was more like getting Mom's attention. And his mom, entitled Mom, just snaps. She turns around, grabs him by his shoulders, goes nose to nose, and screams as she shakes him back and forth. "You will not behave like this, you brat! I'm so tired of this. If you do not stop, you will get a beating when we get home." Now I was shocked, and so was everyone around. She did not say punishment or even spanking. She said beating. Now I was about to tell the lady in front of me to excuse me while I talked to the mother, but she jumped in so fast. She went up to the EM and said, "How dare you talk to your son like that? He is a child and you should never put your hands on him or threaten to, then embarrass him in front of everyone." I was proud this lady said something, but I was still going to ADI paged for a manager in the process because I had a feeling this would go bad. EM starts yelling back. She has the right to do whatever she wants to her son. She could spank, beat, and yell as she sees fit. Now I jump on verbally. "Ma'am, I need you to take yourself and leave the store. Your children and husband, who, by the way, did nothing during this, can check out, but you need to leave." "Excuse me," she yelled. "You need to leave. We do not tolerate abuse of children or other customers. You have done both by screaming at this woman." I turned to the other woman. As much as I didn't want to, I had to say, "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but let us handle this." She wasn't mad. She stepped away to bag her things. I turned back to the mom and she is losing it. "You can't do that. I have the right to shop here. I demand to see a manager, blah, blah, blah." I swear she reaches a pitch only dogs could hear. At this point, my awesome manager shows up. "Hey, OP, what's going on?" Before I can speak, EM speaks up. "This idiot won't let me check out because she doesn't like how I discipline my child." "That's not true, manager. What happened was—" Before I could finish, he spoke up. "Ma'am, we do not tolerate any kind of name-calling in our store, and I need you to be quiet so I can hear from both of you." He turns to me. I then rattle off the story and his eyes widen. "Mind you again, it's a busy day, and other customers are around listening, and about 3 or 4 people jump in to defend me," which thankfully my manager listened to. He turns to the lady and her family. "Ma'am, I need you to leave this store. Your family can finish checking out, but you need to leave. If you don't, I'll call the police. Frankly, you'll be lucky if I don't do that anyway with the threats you made." She tries to stand up for herself, but my manager just escorts her out. The family just follows after her, without their food. You'd think this was the end, but nope. About 15-ish minutes later, after I fill out a report with my manager explaining everything, I head outside to get in my car and head home. I'm on the phone with a friend, trying to explain what happened with the lady. But as I walk outside, I see a police car outside. No lights, just parked. I thought it was weird because I didn't see anyone get caught shoplifting that day, so I shrug and move on. As I reach my car, I hear it. "That's the girl, officer! She's the one who assaulted me and refused to let me shop here." I turn and see the woman from earlier with her kids and husband with 2 cops. I couldn't help it. I laugh. "Are you serious, lady?" My friend is trying to talk to me, but the officer just says, "Ma'am, can you come here so I can get your side and settle this?" I tell my friend I'll call her back and go talk to the officer. He keeps me away from the EM, but I can still see and hear her. I briefly explain what happened. I told him I believed what she was doing to her son was abusive and that it was not okay. The cop asked for specifics, and I tell him what I saw and heard her threaten, but before the cop can say anything, the EM yells, "I'm his mother. I can discipline as I see fit. I can beat him if I want." Again, I'm wide-eyed with her wording, still using beating, not spanking, and the cop looks just as shocked. "If you'd like, my manager is inside. His name is his name, and he can show you the cameras, and this store actually has microphones so you can hear what she says. I admit that I refused service and called her abusive, but that's it. I never touched her." EM still yelling. "See? She admits to verbally assaulting me and refusing me service because of who I am. Arrest her." The cop sighs, looks at his partner, and nods. He looks at me and says, "Okay, you can go. I'm going to give you thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow."